again. We're waiting for YouTube. And alrighty. Hi, everybody. I'm back again. And, hmm, yeah. Anyway, let me just adjust the camera slightly. Well, anyway, that's my day today. It's been a long day. I'm really sorry. Um, so I'm running late, but I wanted to get the next chapter read. So, but yeah, I am very sorry that I was running late. It was very much life stuff that I could not avoid. But yeah, I try to keep everything within a general time frame. Usually, anytime between like super early 5, but that would never really happen. Between 5 and 8. So we're on the like late end of me being able to do this, only because I have to get up early in the morning for work. That's okay. For those of you who are just tuning in, you missed the first chapter, so you might want to go back to the previous episode, give that a watch, and then come on in and listen away. um, so, and also, if you are just tuning in, I'm currently reading my dad's manuscripts. So this is trying to describe it. I wouldn't call it steampunk exactly because just not quite as more fantasy western almost. Fantasy western, flintlock fantasy, that type of thing. There's magic in the age of gunpowder and whatnot. Anyway, um, I'm not going to do a big recap because otherwise, by the time we get to the end of the story, I'll be recapping like what I've already done. Like essentially, I mean these are like an hour each, so 17 hours before that. So no, no, just go back and listen to the previous ones, and you'll. And there's only one right now because we're only on chapter 2. But enough rambling from me. Let's get on with the story. And also, just another quick reminder that I will be editing. So if you hear me pause, my head go down, it's because I'm busy marking it up for getting ready to edit. Okay. Chapter 2. About 5 miles down the road, far enough, it was to be hoped, to cast no suspicion on the Bahali, Bralham stopped the cabriolet. He removed the nut that held the right wheel on, and flung the nut back on the road. Then he lifted the cab, wheel and all, and pulled the wheel half off the axle. He set the wheel down, slapped the reins on the horse's rump, and clucked at the horse. He strode along beside until the wheel fell off and went rolling away. The axle dug a short furrow in the turf. He grinned at us, straightening his little round hat. Foolords can't be bothered to take care of their traps. No wonder they have accidents. He unharnessed the horse and patted it on its nose. You've done well by us, old fellow. I'd take you along, but a carriage horse and band of Bahali riders might make suspicions we don't need. I was sure we could talk our way out of having a carriage horse with us. After all, the Bahali use draft horses for their wagons. On the other hand, I appreciated the caution. We were off. As the light improved, I saw a parasol handle protruding from the round baggage on the back of Kales's saddle. Hell in hot pitch. What a thing for a Bahali woman to carry. Now that was suspicious. I'd already been told that I was along for the ride, though, and should not ask questions. I felt unaccountably disappointed with Callus. Calus? I'm not really sure how to pronounce her name. Um, the riding order settled with Tortola and Gallus at the front, then Calus and Vralum. Dorsica just behind Dors, Dor, Dorcasa, 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 sure, Dorcasa, just behind them, then Stubba leading the remounts, and me bringing up the rear, leading the pack horses. Uh, uh, I didn't stare, but I kept my eyes open. Ralph and Callus were not eloping. They had a close relationship, brother and sister perhaps, or maybe close cousins. Who are they running from? I wish they'd felt they could trust me with that much. It made me a lot less useful to have to be aware of everything. Were the army after them as well as me? Of course, if when the army were looking for me, it would probably be north and west, towards Brigantia, not north and east, towards toward Approach. If the army decided they really wanted me, they might just search in all directions, and those new communication spells could get the word, and those new communication spells could get the word around fast. I comforted myself with the notion that I hadn't been in Freyant, let alone Raylan, long enough to have actually achieved anything this time. Unless they were after me for one of my previous trips. How much had I been betrayed? Had it been, there's a Burgundian spy, the name of Jordan Weston, staying at the Goose Quarter Inn? Or there's a Burgundian spy, name of Jordan, sorry, or there's a Burgundian spy, name of Jordan Weston, who assassinated General Planoro, staying at the Goose Quarter Inn. That's me bumbling, not necessarily the writing. I was headed in an unusual direction, though. Barring some hunter with a special grudge and a lot of intuition, I should be safe. On the other hand, as old Holton would say, you start acting like you're safe, you're in trouble. Which led to the next train of thought. How far and how long would Brigantia hunt me? The original order to betray me had been a mistake that the original order to betray me had been a mistake that nobody caught. But now that the first attempt had missed me, and I had found out that it was official, I would have to be considered an enemy. I might even try to slip back into the country and turn the king's mad delusion to reality. Or I might offer my services to Freyant or Aprush or somewhere else. So in their minds, I had to be dealt with. My own feeling, when I came to it, was that I realized I wanted to do something else altogether. I could pass myself off as a citizen of almost any country, and I had talents that ought to be useful for one or more for more than spying and assassination. Well, I was going to have a while, 2 weeks at least, to consider that one. First, I had to get to Aprush. The Frentish countryside went by, rolling hills, sometimes with flocks grazing, sometimes with crops or gardens growing. Some of the plots were enclosed with low stone walls, either to keep the cattle out or just from the enclosing of common land that had been going on. Here and there, as manor lords sought more sources of income. It was not only not was it not was it only if oh my goodness. Okay. 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 Alrighty. Not only was it a Frenchish notion, similar situations had been going on in several lands. But sometimes it was also a spark it was sometimes it was sparking violent of oh my goodness. The whole entire sentence needs to be fixed. It's fine. There. Sometimes it was a but sometimes it was a sparking violent objection. We didn't push our pace hard, but neither did we waste time. Though I continued to wonder who it might be after the three, I didn't bother asking questions. Instead, every morning and every evening, I did a set or two of the dance, building up my strength and abilities again. I'm not sure what our three fellows thought about it. Probably it was some obscure Bahali thing. The Bahali thought it was some outsider ritual. We camped out most nights. However, every inn along the way had some sort of s- marking on it or nearby, which could be read by any Bahali. Sometimes the mark said that the innkeeper and the locals were hostile to the Brotherhood. Sometimes they said the innkeeper welcomed them. Sometimes they said that the innkeeper would allow the Bahali to shelter in his barns. Even sheltering in the barn was preferable to camping outdoors. And sometimes we were even allowed to eat cooking other than our own. Even in friendly circumstances, it was accepted that Bahali would keep to themselves, not to make trouble, nor even make their presence too conspicuous to others. This of course suited us, since trying to stay too inconspicuous can draw attention. For Bahali, then, conforming to inn behavior was just that, and not something that someone might report to someone for looking for suspicious travelers. Save, of course, that in the minds of some, Bahali were always suspicious. Despite her parasol, which she never used, I began to be favorably impressed with Kalis. Camping out didn't seem to bother her, and if a landlord didn't feel he could inflict Bahali on his other overnight guests, she went to the barn without a murmur. The maid, Dorax, nope, I have, ha, I have a name. I have like a name sheet so I can actually refer to whether or not this is the correct name, the way a name is spelled. And it's not Dorcas, it's Dorax. And there's no X in there. Okay. Sorry about that. The maid Dorax, a little too invisible for a Bahali woman, played her part well, though she remained diffident. Bralham fell into his more into his role as time went on, taking the good with the bad and never once showing any sort of aristocratic annoyance at sights by his inferiors. At slights by his inferiors. Oh boy. Be they innkeepers or semi-drunk farmers, or people met on the roads. As my abilities strengthened over the days, I became aware that the maid was doing some sort of brief, subtle spell every evening. Having only a smattering of magical training myself, I suspected it was some sort of protection or not use that. Sorry. It was some sort of protection slash safety charm. No slash, just or. Having one of those days. Something brought something bought from a hedge witch, which had little effect besides making her feel better. I would have felt better if I thought that reporting it to Stuba would result in more than a suggestion that I keep my nose out of their affairs. Even when we slept in barns or inns, we kept watch. And early one morning, when we were sleeping in an upstairs room of a friendly inn, Stubba woke me quietly. Soldiers. At first, I thought they might be after me, but it seemed that Kalis and Bralum had been half expecting them as well. I looked out the window. There were two French musketeers holding the horses, which meant the others, the other 8 of the party, must be downstairs, questioning the landlord. Any way out? Muttered Bralum. Go downstairs. We have to go through 8 of them, Stubba said. Go out the window here. Those two will raise the alarm before we get over the sill. If we start a distraction outside, said thoughtfully, could we get down and out the back? Depends a lot on how many go out to see the distraction outside, Stubba answered. All right, she said. She took from somewhere she took from somewhere or other a small tube of about 8 inches long and a diameter of my smallest finger. She slipped something into the tube, put it to her lips, aimed out the window, and blew. I didn't see what flew out there into the courtyard, but a second later, there was a sound of a cannon shot, along with a flash, followed by screams and of frightened horses and cursing men. After a lot of stamping and neighing, there was the sound of running horses. Just a bang and a flash, Kayla said. No harm to anyone except maybe a touch of deafness for a bit. Let's go. I've got something to help us get past whoever's downstairs, too. Someone was shouting questions from the door of the inn, and someone was answering about a horrendously obscene noise in a flash that scared all the. Wait, what? No, that doesn't make sense. I have to read it anyway. It's funny. And someone is answering about a horrendously obscene noise and flash that scared all the horrendously obscene horses. I don't think that scared all the horses, causing most of them to take off in a lot of very obscene dust. Got it. Sorry, I'm a little slow tonight, but I got it. Okay. I can translate that. And this was actually insert horrendously obscene word here. Insert other horrendously obscene. So let me backtrack that a bit, and I will have my I'll add my own. Someone was shouting questions from the door of the inn, and someone was answering about a fucking noise and a flash that scared all the damn horses and caused most of them to take off in a lot of frickin' dust. It's worse than that, but my brain is just not up for swearing right now. I can do it. Trust me. I can swear like a sailor. Tonight's not that night. But horrendously obscene language is supposed to be used in the context of that. A lot of fuck. Yeah, just the general. You go George Carlin and 10 things you can't say on TV is probably some of those. We moved quietly to the hall and stairway and on down. The musketeer officer was sharp, though. He must have guessed that the commotion outside was a distraction to allow someone to get out inside to get out. There were about 4 muskets aimed at us when we came in sight of the common room from the stairs. I assessed the situation and was about to take action when Kayla spoke a word. I've seen that sort of spell before. A localized rainstorm that lasted for an instant, drenching the musketeers, and more importantly, their muskets. It would distract them for a second, and with luck, even dampen their priming. 3 of the muskets snapped, and the locks sparked futilely, but the 4th banged, and the ball took Gallus in the chest. By then I was moving. I caught up a stool and sent it flying at the musketeer, who was bringing up his pistol. The stool took him in the face, and the pistol banged, sending a ball off into the wall somewhere, and adding its bit more smoke to and adding maybe a bit more smoke. Nope, don't know. Awkward sentence here. And added a bit of more smoke that had been produced by the musket. The musketeers were going to their swords now, but our band was in motion. There was a broom leaning against the wall of one of the big square pillars that held the ceiling up. I grabbed that as I went by. The dance teaches the use of a number of weapons, including several sizes of staff, and I went into the steps without thinking. I rammed one end into a musketeer's stomach, turned and smacked the edge into another just under the edge of his high combed helmet, slammed into the ribs of another. By that time, Stuba, by some means I hadn't seen, had managed to get inside the reach to another sword and put a knife into his stomach. I took one of the swords, along with the officer's pistol, and we went out the back. More bad luck. Someone had been stationed out in front of the barn, and with all the noise and carrying on, he was alert. I had half expected something like that, though, so I slipped the sword to my left hand, took my knife in my right, flipped it, and threw it. It took him in the chest, going in this light. Good going in this light, but the ribs and the chest are slanted and tend to keep random things from going right through to the heart. All I'd wanted to do was distract him, though, and I succeeded at that. Long enough for me to be able to get in close enough to use this, for me to get in close enough to use the sword. I paused a moment to recover my knife, then followed the others into the barn. Everyone went to work, getting their horses saddled and ready in the fastest possible time. Doric seemed to be rattled and had to be helped by Bralum. We took a circuitous route out of town and back out on the road. But I knew, and expected the others did as well, that as soon as the musketeer, sergeant, corporal, or senior soldier got the horses gathered and worked out what had happened, they'd be after us again, as hard as possible. Gallus died as we were riding. Okay. This chapter's a little more rough. Stuba was in a bad temper, due in great part from not being able to spare the time to bury Gallus, and in a lesser part from having had to fight the musketeers. How did they find us? He demanded, a question on all our minds. No one saw you slip out of the city? He asked Brahlam. Brahlam shook his head. We laid several false trails and broke our trip 3 times so that no one who saw our arrival also saw our departure. Then my mind put several things together. My excuse for not coming up with it sooner was that I had been badly battered and still building myself up. Did you know that Dorax had been working a minor magic every night before she goes to sleep? I thought it was a charm for safety, but now I think it was something else. Something to tell our pursuers where we are. All they'd have to do then was follow our trail and push their horses a little harder than we pushed ours. Everyone turned to look at Dorax, whose hand went to her sash. She was just bringing out a pistol when Callus, who had been standing by the pack on the withers of her own horse, pulled out a parasol by the handle and swung it hard. It took the maid across the neck. I could hear the crack even where I stood. Kayla stood looking down at the body for a moment, then looked up at Stuba. I'm sorry. One trusts servants. One even sometimes confides in them. And just like any other person, sometimes they let one down. Did you confide in anyone else? Stuba was contemptuous, possibly with justice. She straightened. I was a fool in this one instance, but not a complete fool. Brahlam stepped in to calm things down. Shall we stand around finding fault until all the musketeers in Frand come running down on us to wish us good day? Jerry, if you notice any other spells being used, let someone know. Yes, I know you had no way of knowing it was important. And being that out of the way, what now, Stuba? We ride then. The Bahal was little mollified, if at all. Callus, you may wish to check us all over. See if she happened to plant anything else on us that might tell followers where we are. She nodded. I can manage that, but it will take a bit of time. She looked at Gallus's body. He followed her glance and nodded. I'm not going to leave a brother in a shallow grave to have him dig up to, to have him dig up when the musketeers come. You take care of your spells. Leave this to me. He took a flask from his pack, and dropped a drop of silvery fluid at the head of the body, and another at its feet, and 2 more at the waist. It was one of those inert magics, undetectable unless you were looking for it in particular, which required a word to start it off. I'm sorry, brother, he said. Then he spoke a little longer, in a language which I guessed was some very old form of Bahali, of which I could catch no more than a few words. It was, I believe, a traditional farewell to a deceased brother. When he had finished that, he spoke the word that set the spell to work. A bright white flame sprang up, so hot that we all moved back from it. It flared for a few moments, then died, leaving a charred patch on the ground. No one suggested he do the same for Dorax, though there was a look on his face that seemed to hint he wished someone could be a fool enough to do so. to do so. By this time, Callis was done. She had a bitter look on her face. Well, she has been clever and very busy. There are charms sewn into all my clothing and one of Rollum's shirts. My shirt? How did she manage that? 5 hollies, no. I could think of a means or two of if I put my mind to it, but we have other things to think about, such as the fact we have to get new clothes soon. Steppa was, if possible, even more angry now. You know spells and you couldn't see them? She turned on him. They were charms to be seen if one knows they are present. We've already established that I was a fool to trust her, and that trusting included not expecting to have to check to see whether she was betraying me. Might I suggest that recriminations make less sense than dealing with the situation as we find it? I stepped into the matter then, though I knew it wouldn't be appreciated by anyone. Stubba, Collis did well getting us out of there, scaring the horses and rendering the muskets mostly useless. Besides, now we know there is danger. You might better ask her if she can do anything to hinder the pursuit that will be after us. He whirled on me, and it looked for a moment that he was going to spring at me. This isn't your affair. You keep quiet. Should I keep should I also keep my hands tucked in my sash when there's trouble? You might think of the fact that I would have mentioned Dorax's spells a lot sooner if I hadn't expected you to just tell me to keep quiet, the way you're doing right now. It seems to me that there's blame enough to be spread around pretty evenly, and standing here bickering is just giving the musketeers that much more time to catch up on us. At the risk of telling you your business, I suggest we move. He stared at me for a moment, breathing heavily. Then he turned away. Let's be off. Kalis, can you do any spells while we ride? She nodded. I can do some minor ones. Obfuscation, disputation, wrong choice, and that sort of thing. They'll keep us ahead, and may even allow us to gain a little. Oh boy. Okay. We stopped at the town of Sevrovran. Sevrovran, to allow Kalis to buy some new clothes. It had to be done, though it would allow the trackers a place to track us to, and to get directions from locals regarding our route. It was better. It was better than the alternative, though. Going on without replacing spelled clothing in that case. They wouldn't need to ask anybody which way we'd gone. Tortola went along with Kalis, just in case, while the rest of us stopped at the local inn for a glass of wine. The innkeeper was one of those who had no objection to Bohali, so long as they paid their shot, and so long as no other local customers took it into their minds to object. He was so much like the stereotypical innkeeper, chubby, balding, and seeming to be bustling here and there. The building itself was well kept, one of those tall old places, large, square timbers holding up the ceilings, and dimly lit in daytime by light coming through the large leaded front windows. Only one of the other round tables had any custom at it. Maybe customers. Yep, probably customers. One of the people, from his scorched leather apron and well muscled arms, being a smith, probably the smith. Svavarin was not a large town. The other was a merchant, tall and spare, dressed in good clothing of muted browns and a large felt hat, black with tiny beads sewn on the curved rim. Sewn on the curved rim, sat on the wow, and a large black felt hat, black with tiny beads sewn on the brim, sat on the table in front of him. His hairline was receding, though there were only touches of gray in his locks. The blacksmith appeared to be trying to convince the merchant to do something, and the merchant, as most successful merchants are, was not allowing himself to be convinced so easily. It seemed that he would be convinced to at least look at whatever the smith was hoping to show him, but not allowing him to indicate much hope for the matter as something to make money of. So make money off. Make money off of, which always sounds awkward. Then he nodded, indicating that he was at least willing to look at this, and they drank up and prepared to leave. At that moment, a couple of younger locals, brown young farm boys, came in and saw the two. "Hey, Smitty," one of them called. "Going to show them your steam thing again?" "Uh-oh," the other said. "Be careful, it doesn't work the same as the last time. Swabber will be getting a bad name for being hard on merchants." They laughed again at their own wit and took tables. My curiosity was piqued. Callus wasn't likely to be back immediately, so I slid off my seat and headed for the door. Stupa looked up at me sharply and then decided I was headed for the Jakes. I didn't bother to inform him otherwise. The blacksmith led the merchant to the forge, but not unnoticed. The spontaneous crowd seemed to gather, brought together by shouts on the lines. "Hey, come on out! Smitty's going to show his machine." Clearly, this was something that had happened before, and more than once. Smitty was also used to it too. It seemed, for he didn't let the ribbing get to him, just kept on walking. The preparations for the demonstration were not memorable. A large spherical kettle, braced by three strong metal legs, was filled with water, then set on the forge fire. The spout of the kettle was covered by a long cylindrical shaft, which pushed down snugly against the kettle. Toward the end of the shaft were a pair of metal wings, modeled in the shape of the wings of a gliding seagull. A catch of some sort fastened the shaft to the kettle. I couldn't see too well, since being a Bahali, and dressed as I stood out. And though the innkeeper had been easygoing about Bahali, there was no saying that some other person or persons in the crowd may take an exception to my presence. The fire was hot and the kettle was soon boiling, a fact revealed by the sharp hiss of steam coming out of a small pipe just on top of the sphere, next to the spout. I noticed with admiration that there was a little steam leaking out elsewhere on the contraption. For the tools he had at his disposal, the smith had made very close joins. Then Smitty pulled a wire connected to the catches that held the shaft to the kettle, and the shaft flew out the door of the forge. It traveled for 30 yards before it suddenly keeled over and dived for the earth. There were shouts and cheers from the crowd and a good deal of barking from the dogs, but the brown-clad merchant did not seem impressed. He shook his head, said something to Smitty, and walked away. The smith shrugged and went back to his work. There were horseshoes to be made and plowshares to be sharpened, and he seemed little bothered by the failure of his demonstration. I doubted that he would let this one failure, or many more, shatter his dream. He would keep tinkering with his device and attempting to develop some real uses for it, rather than it rather than just demonstrating it and waiting for some merchant to see some use in it. At present, it was not even fit for a spectacle to be shown at fairs. I got myself back to the inn and sat down. I didn't annoy Stuba with the voluntary description of the event. I would have continued to say nothing about it, save that he asked me, "What was all that confusion out there?" The Smiths invented a machine of some sort, a flying thing, powered by steam. He was hoping to sell it to the merchant, but the merchant wasn't impressed. He gave a sharp nod, long as it doesn't have anything to do with us. Shortly thereafter, Kalis came back, Tortola behind her. She'd spent a few minutes changing her clothes, and she handed me a package as well. "Shirt and trousers. It'll be less memorable than what you're wearing." "Thanks." "No thanks necessary. We need to try to stay unseen as much as possible. I'll leave my old clothes and Bralham's shirt outside of town. They can track them that far. Then they'll have to depend on something other than magic." That made sense, too. I suspected Kalis would have spent a bit of time removing the charms from the clothing, but this way, the pursuit would follow us to somewhere out of town, find the clothing, then have to depend on following our tracks or asking locals. Each little bit of delay of the pursuit would work to our good. Tortola came hurrying back from the point. "Musketeers at the crossroads ahead." Stuba nodded. We had been expecting that. Kalis was becoming pale and drawn with the stress of keeping her spells out on all sides, and they weren't the kinds of spells that could be infallible. Stubbs frowned in concentration. Wait, what? I think I missed a page. I feel like I missed a page. I may not have. Okay. Stubba frowned in concentration. "Can we get past?" Still not part of the planning. I was nevertheless certain that the Frontish would have alerted garrisons in a wild area of northern France. Bali being Bali, Bahali being Bahali, though. I was also sure that Stuba and Tortola could get us past most of them. It would require a lot of slipping around at night, though. The Frenchish could make things difficult for us if they chose to bring out a wizard or two, but in that case, Kalis might be called on to do a little more for us. Stuba, having eased off his initial anger, asked, "Kalis, could you tell if they have any magicians with them?" "Very likely. I'll need a minute or two, though. Do you want me to try?" "Please do." So we all dismounted to ease the kinks out of our muscles. Then Kalis went to work. There were several schools of magic, and they've each borrowed a few state elements from the others. The development of the art has been a gradual refining of methods of cross fertilization and more refining. It has also led to alignments of certain schools with certain others, and against still others. With the little smatter. Mhm. With a little smattering of magic I knew, I could recognize some bits of what Kalis was doing, but that was it. Having a slight talent for magic, most of what she did was as far beyond my abilities as flapping my arms and flying to the moon. Finally, she shook her head. No magicians with this lot. They have a couple of low level detection globes, just enough to make it difficult for me to slip us past them under a seeming. I have to put a lot of effort into hiding the fact that there was a spell at work, and I think it would be best to save my magic for some time when there's no alternative. Right, Stupid said. We'll hide out until dark, then slip past. 2 nights later, we're cold camped in a copse of trees. We'd been using the back roads and paths, and it was wearing on us all. Of course, Freyant didn't have enough soldiers to watch every place where we people could go, so they limited themselves to setting up checkpoints at crossroads and patrolling from there. On the other hand, there were several bands beating the bushes behind us, and we couldn't hide all the traces of our passing from everyone. At least, not without traveling so slowly that someone, sooner or later, would come upon us. The rest of them were discussing all options, hiding out a straight run to the border, hiding ourselves as spells, all the lot. No decision seemed to be close. I was still not quite part of the group, so no consultation on my part was desired. It's said that some adepts of the dance can sense wrongness in the ether, so to such an extent that they can tell how many enemies are coming up on them, their relative positions, and it seems what they had for breakfast. I'm not that good, but sometimes, such as now, I recognized that we were in trouble. I took a moment to say, "Trouble, Stuba," and then I moved into the brush. The first bandit was just starting to move when I put my knife under his ribs to his heart. As the first bandit was falling, I grabbed a pistol out of his hand, whirled, and fired. The pistol kicked horribly. Had the man never cleaned it? A bandit across from me slumped out of the bushes. There was a shot from my left, but I was already moving. No, I'm not one of those adepts. But when I let the dance take me, I do not do too badly. The one who shot at me was close enough that I could take a few steps over and cut his throat while he was reaching for a knife of his own. I took that knife and threw it, letting the dance assess its weight and balance. I was aware of nearly everything in this state, of my companions moving, of pistols firing, of bandits on the edge of panic because things hadn't gone as they were supposed to. The thrown knife took another bandit in the neck, not quite where I'd intended, but I was still moving. What was Kalis doing with that blasted parasol? The bandit chief? Yes, but don't ask how I could tell. Was roaring at his men, trying to reorganize them in the face of sudden disruption of his plans. I rushed in his direction, taking a last minute dodge as he fired. Then I was inside his sword, thrusting up with my knife, and he went down. By this time, the rest of them were scattering and fleeing, crashing through the brush. Since there was only 3 of them, I let them go. There's a common belief that bandits don't bother Bahali. The more cynical say it's out of professional courtesy, one thief to another. But the fact is that the Bahali know they can go after bandits with impunity. So, anytime a bandit attacks a Bahali, he makes deadly enemies of the whole brotherhood. I could look around at how the rest of my party were doing. No why there's good there. Kalis had a short sword which had been hidden in her parasol and stood over the body of a bandit she'd killed. Her sword still had a low guard. Ralam had gotten another, Tortola still another, and Stuba stood with his back to a tree, watching. No, I didn't think any less of him for not getting into the thing. It had started and finished fast. He glanced toward me. Good work, he said, almost as though the words were vinegar in his mouth. Ralam looked in my direction, his eyes widening a little. Be sure to tell me if I offend you, Jerry. I'd like to be able to apologize quickly. Old Holton had told me time and again, don't be too fast to kill, but don't hesitate when the time comes. If you learn well, you'll be able to make the fight. You'll be able to make the right decision. I pushed back the usual feelings about waste and destruction and concentrated on what was to be done now. I went through the belongings of the bandit I'd killed. Robbing the dead sounds bad, but when you look at it as keeping things from going to waste, it seems to me like a good notion. I recovered four silver Ralanites, as well as a couple of Aprush silver mazers, 3 pistols, 4 knives, and 2 swords. After a bit of consideration, I abandoned the swords. They were not the Bahali weapon of choice, nor were they in good enough condition to be sold for a price that would justify their hauling away. The pistols weren't in any great condition either, but I could clean them up and sell them for a half decent price. I still had the musketeer officer's pistol, a very good one, and now I had plenty of powder and shot for it as well. I wouldn't carry the pistol openly, but it could turn out to be useful. Cullis had cleaned her sword and replaced it in her parasol, and though she seemed calm enough, I could tell she didn't like the killing. We moved from that camping place immediately. With all with with all the pistol firing and noise, it was possible that someone had heard, and that they might be the kind of person that investigates noises. Soldiers, for instance. On we went into northwest France, slipping past posts of soldiers at every crossroads and evading patrols on some of the lesser traveled roads. If we'd taken any, if we'd had any vehicles with us, it would have been more difficult. Even as we were, sometimes it was a challenge. Kalis continually more worn with keeping up her spells, could still just detect the presence of magical detectors, and on one occasion, even wizards themselves. As I mentioned before, my knowledge of magic is sketchy. It would seem to me, though, that detecting a magician at a distance without being detected yourself is a ticklish bit of business. We no longer stopped at towns either. Most towns along our path had a small force of soldiers stationed there by now, thanks to the spread of magical communications. We stopped to buy food at isolated farms and at hamlets too small to rate a patrol of soldiers. On such occasions, one or two of us would go in, with Kalis staying behind, casting a glamour on them so that people asking afterward would get various stories of our descriptions. It wouldn't throw the pursuit off altogether, but it might delay them a little. And in our situation, a little delay was better than none at all. All the days went on, though. That's right. As the days went on, though, we became aware that our situation was becoming more desperate. More and more of the minor tracks ahead of us were patrolled, and the pursuit was becoming more intense behind us, with more troops joining all the time. The dance told me that we were being sought before, behind, and on all sides. Not that I needed dance to guess that at all. One evening, Stuba said, "We've done our best and we can't do much more. The soldiers at the next crossroads. We've all got the roads covered, even the smaller tracks. Our only hope is going cross country and hope we don't leave such a clear trail through the fields that they'll spot us for sure. I'm sorry, they'll spot us for sure in the morning. But if we get past these, it's just a short run to the border. 5, maybe 6 more days. Kayla, you've done a lot for us already. Can you do anything more? I think I get it could get us past these. The problem is that I won't be able to do much besides hold on to my horse for the next day and a half. Are we likely to need magic desperately in that time? I can't answer that question, Jova said, except by taking the best guess I can. As far as I'm concerned, if we can slip through this band, we should be able to stay clear of the pursuit until we reach the border. Kalis nodded. This spell, the journey cloak, will hide our passing fairly well. No invisibility, but close enough to it if we take it right. We have to lead the horses. No sudden movements. Just go on at a steady pace. She looked around to see if we all understood what that meant. Or, sorry, if we all understood. Then said, I'll get the spell ready. We all stood in the skylight as Kalis gave us final instructions. I reiterate, 1 second here. Okay, let me try that again. We all stood in the starlight as Kalis gave us final instructions. I reiterate, a steady pace, no sudden movements. This spell is effective against people, a little less so for animals. If our horses sent the horses soldiers. Nope, the soldiers' horses. Oh boy. Okay. If our horses sent nope. If our horses sent the soldiers' horses, they could start making noise. Most of that spell can cover. If the soldiers if the soldiers' horses start making noise, the soldiers will be alerted that something's wrong. I doubt that I doubt if that will allow them to penetrate the spell, but they'll be watching the road more carefully. And that means that any sudden movement would be much more likely to be seen. Everyone understand? We all agreed. So it would be best if I were in the middle of the group so as to be able to cover the whole group more easily. Bralum, will you handle my horse for me? I want to be free to concentrate on the spell. Of course. Stuva looked at me. Jerry, you bring up the rear, right? Right. I wondered if you were coming to trust me a bit. That I wonder if you were coming to trust me a bit because there was no cautionary words about what I should or should not do. So then, okay, let's give the word. Just a few minutes while I get this spell in place. She murmured rhythmically for what seemed like a long time, then gave a sharp word of command. As the spell came over me, I felt a vague sort of itch, saw a slight shimmer, which disappeared quickly. Now, said Kalis, almost as if she grudged the effort to speak the word. The starlight seemed terribly bright, shining on the gray dust of the road, the gray wooden walls of the cottages, the dark thatch of their roofs. The colored uniforms of the cavalry were rendered in shades of black and gray, and they sat in wooden chairs at the edges of the road. Starlight twinkled on pistol butts, sword hilts, and badges vaguely lighted the faces vaguely lit the faces of the men themselves. On we went, moving at a steady walking pace. We passed within 4 feet of them, and they looked at us, but didn't see us. I was expecting any moment for one of their faces to take a look of alarm, for a sudden movement toward sword or pistol, but there was no movement. They didn't see us at all. Even our horses' hooves made no sound on the street, left no track in the dust. The horses were nervous too, flicking up their heads and snorting. Each time one of them did so, I was sure we'd be discovered. Kalis must have made allowance in her spell for such behavior. We passed on between the unseeing soldiers and up the street. We continued carefully for a time, even after the villages passed, out into the starlit countryside, sweating all the way. I wonder if Kalis knew how long she needed to hold her spell on, or if she was just going by a guess. Suddenly, she stopped, muttered something to Bralam, who spoke softly. Stuba! Mount up! Bralam helped Kalis into her saddle, then mounted up himself. He rode beside Kalis, who sat slumped in her saddle, barely able to hold the reins. We went another 5 miles or so before we camped for the rest of the night, off the road and out of sight. Kalis was still pale and drawn after a short night's sleep, holding herself in the saddle by force of will. We pressed on toward the border, covering as much ground as we could. 3 days later, closing rapidly on the border, we spotted a dust cloud behind us. Most likely troopers after us, Stuba said. We'll have to run for it. So we moved along fast, despite the fact that Kalis still had not completely recovered from casting the journey cloak spell. I wasn't sure what Stuba planned at the border. There was going to be at least some force of soldiers there on continual guard, and they'd have heard of us and be watching. They'd have most likely been patrolling the border, checking the lesser traveled roads and tracks as well. Our best hope would be to dodge past one of the patrols after they'd gone by. It would be ticklish if the pursuit were already too close behind us. Stuba, though I had my doubts of some of his attitudes, had things worked out with a couple of alternatives in mind as well. Come on, he shouted, swinging his horse off the road and over a plowed what? Ah, field. It made sense. Our tracks were visible, but if we could stay ahead of the pursuit long enough to dodge patrols at the border, we'd be better off. Our horses, whom we'd fed and watered as best we could on the way, were no longer in peak condition, but as long as we didn't have to run too far, we should make out well. We came up on a small stream, running in a silver line across our front. It ought to be the Narthgun, known in Efrush as Nurthog, which marked the border between the two nations at this point. A glance behind showed that the pursuit was in sight as well, and it wasn't likely they'd stop for a mere bounty. What we had to find was the Efrush border patrol, or perhaps a town of large enough size that it warranted a small garrison of troops. How far and how fast did the pursuit come? Were their soldiers in better condition than ours? How long could we stay ahead of them, wearing our mounts into the ground? At Stuba's command, we held out we held our horses at a steady pace, waiting until we had to run to stay ahead of the Frankish soldiers. In the meantime, the soldiers were coming up at a gallop. With any luck, our horses would still have enough of a gallop in them that Frankish wouldn't be able to keep up. We splashed through the stream, slowing a little. Then Stubba called out. Then Stubba called out something. What it was, I couldn't tell. But a moment later, we were all galloping. We were all galloping. The country of Afresh was no different from the Frankish countryside we'd just passed, but my geography lessons told me that would change in a few dozen miles. As Stuba had planned, the Frankish horses had dropped back shortly after we started to gallop, but I could tell that my gray, for instance, would not be able to hold that pace for long. Hold the pace for long. One of my questions was soon answered. Their horses were in better condition, and they were gaining on us. I heard someone back there shouting, it could only be a command for us to halt. Wasted breath. We weren't going to stop now. There was a pistol shot behind us, and my back twinged automatically at the sound. It was as much use as shouting. Firing a pistol from the back of a galloping horse and actually hitting a galloping target required something on the order of divine intervention. We came around a hill and saw a road on the other side. There was a faint plume of dust to the north of us. Stuba went in that direction, and we all followed him. If it were a large enough, if it were a large enough par- party of travelers, the French commander might behind us might well decide he'd done as much as he could be asked of him. After all, they were well inside Afresh now, and even a hot pursuit allowed so much. An officer of the rank would be riding at the head of the patrol. At the head of a patrol would think hard before even creating the semblance of an international incident. We came around a copse of trees, our horses gasping and shuddering under us, and there was a troop of cavalry. Their blue and cream uniforms were no Frankish uniform that I'd ever heard of, while on the other hand, I knew most Afresh troops wore orange of some shade. Then I saw the flag they were flying, the crown supported on a crossed cannon, and knew we were safe. Okay, so that was me butchering a bunch of words. I'm sorry. It's mostly because it's late. It's been a very long day for me. Um, but I figured blathering the story would be better than no story at all. Sure, sure. We'll go with that. Anyway, thank you everybody for tuning in, and I will try to be there earlier tomorrow. Yeah. So, without further ado, I bid you all a good night. And like I said, thanks again for tuning in, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Good night.